Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for episode 7 of season 4 of Doc Talks with Dr. Forrest Tennant and friends. We have a special guest tonight, Donna Wilkes. We're so happy to have her with us. We're glad all of you could join us tonight. Dr. Tennant, I'm going to go ahead and, Dr. Tennant, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to be here. Last week we had some technical difficulties, and I think we've got them worked out thanks to my good wife, Miriam, who has figured out the technology of how in the world we're supposed to do these meetings now. Anyway, I'm delighted to be here because I want to address a subject that's really applicable almost to every pain patient, or at least every pain patient who's got to take medications and deal with their problem on a daily basis. And I know that everyone who's listening to this has heard something about the glial cells. I've mentioned it before on 2 or 3 occasions. But tonight I put together a presentation to try to give you a background of what this means and what you're to do about it. And to get us started, I want to relate something that happened from 2 patients this week. Number one, I had a gentleman this week who has an inherited collagen disorder. He's got arachnoiditis. He's had all kinds of problems for many, many years. And in the last 2 or 3 years, he's had an intrathecal pump put in. And the pump got up to where it's really tried pre-alt, and he got to where he was taking, even in the pump, maximal dosages of fentanyl and dilaudid together, and with some clonidine once in a while. Well, the reason he's contacted me is that the pump has quit working. Okay? Now, it's not the pump's fine, but the opioids don't work anymore. Now, he is one of many people that I'm hearing from who wake up one day and their high dosages of opioids, including fentanyl and dilaudid, oxycodone, hydrocodone, don't work anymore. Okay? Now, what I want to talk about tonight is this used to be a mystery. Why do opioids in some people quit working? The answer lies in the glial cells. Okay? Now, a second person talked to me this week and called me, and in fact, he's in New Jersey. Anyway, he said, Dr. Tennant, I started on your protocol about a year ago for my adhesive arachnoiditis. And he says, I was just doing just great. When I started the ketorolac and the methylprednisolone, they immediately started relieving my pain. I was almost pain-free within a week or 2, and I've been doing great for this past year. So I decided to stop my methylprednisolone and my ketorolac, and so I stopped them, but nothing changed. I was still just fine. And I said, well, that's good news. That's good news. But if he'd have asked me that a couple of 3 years ago, I'd have been mystified. But now I know the answer to his good situation, and that is it all lies in the glial cell. In other words, one tragedy, his opioids don't work. And can he even find pain release for the rest of his life? Real question. And then secondly, we've had somebody who's done very well with the standard adhesive arachnoiditis drugs, the methylprednisolone and the ketorolac, and he has stopped them, and he still feels just as good as he did before. So what should he do? Well, the answers to these things lie in the glial cells. Now let's talk a little bit about the history of the glial cells. Now, first off, the glial cells are a cell that's in your brain and your spinal cord, as well as in the cauda equina. So it's in the central nervous system. These cells are throughout the brain, spinal cord, cauda equina. Why is it called glia? That word comes from Greek. That means glue. So glia in Greek means glue. The original belief for centuries was that the glial cell was the glue that held the brain and the spinal cord together. Under the microscope, you could see these cells and they seem to be, they're branched. They've got a lot of branches on them, or tentacles, you might want to call them that. And that these cells seem to hold together the brain and the spinal cord. And some were a little varied in size or content, and so they ended up with various names like astrocytes and oligodendrocytes and microglia. And you don't need to know any of that. Just know the word glial cells, because if you have pain, you take medications for pain, you need to know about the glial cells. So we've got just started out here right now with some things, and now we're going to go into it a little further. Well, a few years ago, they found out, some really bright researchers found out that the glial cell was more than glue. What they found out was that the glial cell is the equivalent of the lymphocyte in the bloodstream. Okay? And this gave us a concept that is critical for everybody listening to this to understand. You have two basic immune systems in the body. One outside the nervous system, mainly in the blood and in the spleen and the lymph nodes and the thymus glands. But then you have a second separate immune system in the central nervous system, and it's based on the glial cell. If you have pain, you have serious disease, you have to target both systems. You got that? You have to understand, and so do your practitioners, that you've got two immune systems that you've got to work with. Now, these two immune systems both have a basic function. Now, the basic function of the lymphocyte in the bloodstream and the glial cell in the central nervous system is, now the glial cell does help hold the place together, but it has the function of protecting you. Now, anything that gets in the central nervous system, a virus, a bacteria, a toxin, a poison, too much electromagnetic energy, the glial cells is going to capture it, wrap its tentacles around it, secrete its chemicals, it's going to neutralize it. It's going to kill that bacteria, or it's going to neutralize that chemical or that energy. It's your protector. Now, just like the lymphocyte, it does a lot of this protection by creating inflammation. Now, inflammation is the same whether it's in the central nervous system or outside the nervous system. We like to use the term neuroinflammation these days just to imply that it's in the central nervous system. But all of you know what inflammation is, but let's make sure we do know what inflammation is. Inflammation is when tissue gets hot and it gets vibrant and it can grab you and kill organisms. But guess what? A little inflammation is a good thing. Too much destroys your own tissues. Okay, now let's get this real straight. A little inflammation is what you want. It protects you. Too much inflammation, the inflammation turns on you and starts destroying your own tissues. Okay? Now, here's the situation. These glial cells in the central nervous system will produce too much inflammation if the thing that caused the glial cell to activate in the first place doesn't stop. Okay? In other words, that glial cell and the lymphocytes are there waiting to be activated. And that's the term you'll see in writings. You'll see in medical writings or even lay writings now the terms glial cell stimulation or glial cell activation. What that means is the glial cell is producing inflammation. A little bit's a good thing, too much is a bad thing. Now, why would the glial cell produce too much inflammation? Well, number one, if you've got an injury or a wound that just doesn't go away, it just keeps feeding the glial cell to stay active. It doesn't shut off. It just keeps producing too much inflammation. Now, The second thing that causes it, you folks that have an autoimmune disease may have that autoimmunity through what's called autoantibodies continue to activate the glial cell. And they're not certain about this, whether EDS falls in that category or not, but we certainly know that diseases like systemic lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriasis, ankylosing spondylitis, Sjogren's syndromes, all of those diseases are autoimmune. And each one of those can continuously stimulate the glial cells to overactivate. But the big one we think today is what we call viral reactivation. Now, you're going to hear a lot about this in the next few weeks. I've been doing this research almost daily since a big report came out in 2018 as to what the Epstein-Barr virus can do with the human body. And at any rate, you're going to hear the term viral reactivation. The one that does the worst job is the Epstein-Barr. Cytomegalovirus virus is right in there, mycoplasma. Now maybe COVID, but COVID seems to have a little different. We're not quite sure what it does. At any rate, the Epstein-Barr reactivation clearly activates the glial cells, big time. And we think that today, a high percentage, maybe almost everyone, who develops constant intractable pain may have Epstein-Barr activation, glial cell activation. At least those people who have adhesive arachnoiditis and severe intractable pain diseases, particularly arachnoiditis, have Epstein-Barr reactivation. And you'll have to hear more about that. But three things. If you've got an injury or a disease, like a wound that just won't heal, that's going to continually activate the glial cells. If you have an autoimmune disease, you're in danger of overactivating the glial cells at all times. And thirdly, if you have developed Epstein-Barr reactivation, that will cause excess inflammation. Now, let me get to the bad news. Okay, get to the bad news. I think I've talked to you before, and I'm going to talk a lot about it again. Pain control inside the central nervous system is based on what we call systems of neurotransmitters and receptors. Okay? Neurotransmitters and receptors. And there are about 7 different ones that have been identified. You may see it there, and I'm going to get more to it. But I'm going to digress just for just a couple of minutes. I'm going to read you these 7 receptors, okay? Because everybody, particularly those of you who have got constant pain, intractable pain, you got to know about these 7. Because you've got to, in order to get relief, you're going to have to trigger at least 2 a day or 3 or 4 to get relief. You can't just trigger one. Now, the main one is the one that everybody focuses on, and that is the endorphin receptors, because opioid is the most potent. Okay, but the second most potent is one called GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid. And that's the one that gets triggered by Lyrica and gabapentin and Valium and Xanax and Soma. And then you've got your dopamine receptor. That's probably third in line. That's triggered by any number of your stimulant drugs. But then you've got cannabinoid receptors. You've got serotonin receptors. You've got one called N-methyl-D-aspartate. You've got one called adrenergic. So you've got 7 of these receptors. Okay. Now, when you get too much glial cell activation, the poor gentleman who has a pump in, and even fentanyl and dilaudid combined, gives him no pain relief. What's happened? The excess glial cell inflammation has knocked out his endorphin receptors. Okay? Doesn't have any of them left. So what you going to do for pain relief? I don't know for sure. He's got to try to trigger enough of the other receptors. But then I ask you another question. Have you ever taken any of the supplements or drugs to suppress glial cell activation? He's never heard of it, he said. Never heard of it. Has your doctors ever brought it up to you? My doctors, are you kidding? I mean, that was his response, not mine. But anyway, he said, I don't even know what you're talking about. I said, well, you need to know about glial cell activation because that's what's happened to you. You didn't get tolerant to the medicines. You wiped out your triggering points. You wiped out your mechanisms because you haven't done anything for years about neuroinflammation and glial cell suppression. Okay? Now, the other fellow who did real well, and he got really relief with his methylprednisolone and his ketorolac, what he did, he put the glial cell in remission. He calmed it down. He got that cell to go back to its normal state to where he doesn't have excess inflammation. So what does he need to do? Well, he doesn't need to take as much ketorolac or methylprednisolone. Maybe he doesn't need to take them at all. But he has to protect himself and keep those glial cells under control and contained for the rest of his life. So it's easy for him because I'm going to tell you in a few minutes what you do about all this. It's real simple. So anyway, I was able to tell both of these gentlemen what they need to do. Okay? Now, because the neuroinflammation caused by the glial cell in research circles is really causing a lot of action, and rightfully so. And there's some research going on out there that I want to bring to your attention. The ones that we're interested in here is the development of constant intractable pain. But there's a couple of other areas that I do want to mention to you. It does look like that excess glial cell inflammation causes a lot of the Parkinson's cases. And for those of you who are developing tremors or something, you may be knocking out some of your dopamine receptors because of excess glial cell inflammation. And I hate to bring it up, but dementia. Okay? You've got to protect yourself from developing dementia, losing your memory, can't read, can't think, can't rationalize, because neuroinflammation will strike those neurons also. Now, I've been looking at brain scans of people with severe intractable pain. And what I find is that this neuroinflammation isn't in any one spot. In fact, I've got a lot of x-rays that shows these white knockout spots, and they're just spread all over the brain in no one certain place. So you can't say that it's going to knock out your serotonin receptor or give you Parkinson's disease or your endorphin receptors. It's kind of the luck of the draw. Viruses don't decide that they like a serotonin receptor better than a dopamine receptor. They just kind of hop in there, okay? And they decide whatever glial cell happens to be handy. And to make matters worse, when we talk about Epstein-Barr reactivation, I'll be coming back to you with that. The virus itself may inhabit the brain and in the glial cells. They actually can live inside the glial cells. So this is all things that are coming down the pike, but things we can do about. Now, let me give you the good news. Because of the necessity to calm down the glial cells, there has been a plethora, just a whole bunch of piles of research to figure out what medicinals will calm down the glial cell. Now, and every one of these, and every person out here watching this can easily obtain some of the medicinals that calm down the glial cell. Okay? Now, and I've been collecting references on this and trying to stay right up on every laboratory who's doing anything with glial cells. And I am pleased to tell you that I'm going to show you a list. Now, everybody here, get out your pad and pencil, okay? Because you need to know, I'm going to give you two lists. One list are the medicinals that you can buy without a prescription. You can buy them at the health food store. You can buy them over the internet. And some can fit your pocketbook better than others. And I don't know which one is the best. All I know is that in laboratory studies, not in human studies, but in the laboratory, here are 6. Hope you can see these now. I'll read them to you. 6 herbal natural products that suppress the glial cell and neuroinflammation. Okay? I'm going to read these off now. I don't know if you can see these or not.
Put that back up, please. Thank you.
Okay, first one, resveratrol. Okay, second one, curcumin. Third one, luteolin, pycnogenol, boswellia, and kratom. Now, what's nice about some of these, a lot of these have some crossover things. Okay, so those are your, at least coming out of laboratory studies, are herbal natural products available to anybody who, and they have been shown, at least in laboratories, to suppress glial cell inflammation. Now, I have here 6 prescription medications that suppress the glial cells. And these are the most potent, and I'm going to put right up here, number 1 and 2, methylprednisolone and dexamethasone. Okay. Now these are corticosteroids, and these are the only 2 corticosteroids. Prednisone is not in that class. Hydrocortisone is not in that class. Triamcinolone is not in this class. But these 2 cross the blood-brain barrier and suppress glial cell activation and neuroinflammation. And unless you're like the good lucky gentleman who used it for a while, these are the most potent glial cell inhibitors we have, these 2 corticosteroids. And that's why I highly recommend anybody who's starting on a protocol needs to be on either methylprednisolone or dexamethasone on 1 to 3 days a week. These are the big guns, okay? Those are the big guns. Now, low-dose naltrexone, it's not as potent as corticosteroids, but it does have some glial cell suppression. Minocycline, that's a nice cheap antibiotic. 100, 200 milligrams a day is cheap. Most doctors won't hesitate to prescribe it. Metformin. Now, if you're diabetic or you're prone to diabetes, taking a metformin at bedtime, studies show that it helps suppress glial inflammation. And lastly, ketorolac, that's the one labeled drug as an anti-inflammatory that works on the glial cell. It crosses the blood-brain barrier, has a lot of pain relief, and it will suppress the glial cells. But again, you can't take it every day. It's a drug you can only take once or twice a week or 3 times at the most. But these are the prescription agents to suppress the glial cells. In my opinion, if you are someone out here who has constant daily pain, you've got take opioids every day, and that pain just doesn't go away, you need to be on, in my opinion, maybe 1 or 2 non-prescription herbal drugs and at least some prescription potent compound to suppress the glial cells. Now, this is in addition to your opioids or to your Xanax or to your Ritalin. This is not a substitute for your pain relief. Pain relief is symptomatic. You got to have that to function, to think, and what have you. But you got to also keep that glial cell inflammation down so your opioids and your other drugs keep working. Okay? Now, I hear this all the time. Well, if I don't get pain relief within 2 hours, I don't want to take it. That's foolish thinking. You've got to be having a preventive program as well as a symptomatic here and now program. You got to be able to do both. So anyway, that's the lesson today, and I think it's a critical one. And certainly, I'm not quite sure to tell you where to go from here, except don't forget glial cell activation. Find out as much as you can about it. And just remember, do something. Take some of those herbal natural compounds or some of those medicinals in addition to your regular pain programs. Okay, with that, we've got a very interesting person to interview here today. Donna, I see you're here.
Yes, doctor. Thank you.
Now, Donna has been on board following us and been an advocate for a long time. And she, you see there, she's breathing a little extra oxygen, it looks like. And we're anxious to hear how you got here. And anyway, Don, I'm going to tattle on you a little bit. You've got a good attitude for all that's happened to you. Okay. And she gives her opinion, and they've been good, and our communications have been just terrific. Anyway, Donna, let's start with some beginning. Where are you from originally?
Washington, D.C. I was born and raised here and pretty much lived most of my life here.
Yeah, yeah. Now you don't consider yourself one of these politicians that we hate all the time, right? You just happen to have been.
I never liked politics.
Yeah. Well, you got a lot of company. Okay, you're born in Washington, D.C. Now, you go ahead and tell me us about your schooling and your education.
Okay. My name is Donna Wilkes, and like I said, I was born in DC, raised pretty much most of my life, went to Catholic schools in the city, and for college, I got a scholarship because I was always interested from the time I was in fourth grade in science and taking extra credit courses and entering competitive, science things for students in high school. And I got a scholarship and entered Georgetown University early decision as a chemistry major. And by the time I was in my sophomore year, my second year, I was commuting and I was living at home and I went to answer the phone and something I had done a million times. And I sat down on the step, leaned back, and heard this and felt this terrific pain. And even my dad, who was two rooms over, asked what that sound was because it sounded like a tree branch, just like a thunderbolt or a lightning bolt, rather, had hit a tree branch. That's how loud the sound was. And when I went to stand up, I almost fell over. And I thank God he was home anyway. The upshot is, I found out I had a fracture of my sacrum, and it's believed by some doctors that perhaps that was the beginning of what became an ultimately arachnoiditis. I was diagnosed a few months, many months later, within a year, with cauda syndrome. And in about a year after that, so it slowed down my education, and it was just trying to carry the books. I ended up having to get to another parking lot because I had to stop and I'd have to sit. I couldn't walk very far. And my tests had to be proctored after a few years because I couldn't sit very long. And, I was always having to, as you would say, I noticed, and that was one of the hallmarks. And at the time, I didn't even know, no one told me really anything about arachnoiditis. They just told me I had it. And there was no internet then, but I looked it up and, but it didn't say how it was treated.
Yep. Donna, I'd like to, if I can, I'd like to go back and see if you can help us out a little bit on exactly how this started with you, because I do think that maybe your story may help a little bit in helping me and other people understand how these things get started. Now, first off, how old were you when this happened?
I was 19. I was 19 when I sat down and fractured my spine. I now know, I didn't know then, that my spinal bones were not normal. I didn't know till years later that my parents were told that when my mom was hemorrhaging with me at 3 months, that I was not going to survive because I was stuck to the tumor that was causing her to hemorrhage. And the doctors had told my parents to be prepared to lose me. So the thing was back in, I'm 70 now. And so in the early 50s, you didn't have anything other than x-ray to tell whether you were alive or not. And the fact that I was still there on an x-ray a few weeks later told them that.
Now, you were 19.
Mm-hmm.
I assume that you and your doctors were quite surprised to have this at such a young age.
Well, yes. And also, one of the problems was I really didn't have a family doctor. My pediatrician kind of let me go when I was like 16 or 17. So I really didn't have, I had to go to the student health service. So I really didn't have people who knew me, and that was part of the problem. There really was no one to coordinate my care either. for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Did they give you a diagnosis saying you were inherited with any kind of collagen disease or metabolic disease of any kind?
Well, I've never been diagnosed with a collagen disease. I do have thoracolumbar scoliosis, and and I've had a history of my first surgery, even after I was diagnosed with the arachnoiditis, was a decompression laminectomy at 20 for spinal stenosis. And
Okay.
unfortunately, go ahead. Sorry. Mhm.
Now, before you had your back trouble, did you have any other medical problems at all when you were a teenager? Or were you
Well,
a sickly child at all?
Well, I had in those days, I think almost everybody, because there were no vaccines, got measles, mumps, chicken pox. The
Sure.
only unusual thing I got that probably, well, is scarlet fever. I got that when I was 8 years old, apparently from swimming in, the ocean, but, beach or something. I don't remember, but I remember being really sick. But that's about all. I think I've pretty much had the typical childhood diseases that people in the 50s and early 60s would have.
Yeah. Did you recover from the scarlet fever? Okay.
As far as I know, yes.
They
Mhm.
gave you penicillin and you got, you,
I think so.
yep.
Yep. I
And
mean,
you,
I just know I was sick for a
yep.
while, but I didn't have a recurrence of anything, fortunately.
You were able to pick yourself up and resume life after that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Mhm.
Then you back in. When you had your back, that sudden pain when you stood up, how long did that last? Did that go away after a while?
It went away. It kind of lasted, felt like minutes, okay. Um, but eventually it kind of died down. I mean, but it never really went away. It was like from that moment on, it seemed like it was always some level of pain, and not like it is now, but it just never completely went away. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Now you made it to age 70.
Yes, thanks be to God.
You got
Truly.
you started down this journey of some unfortunate health at age 19. You're now 70, and you look to me like you're going to go on for a while. We,
Thank you. Thank you. Oh
yeah,
my goodness.
we're not going to get rid of you this weekend, all right? Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Dr. Ibsen, are you following this thing here? uh,
Yes, I
Dr.
am, sir.
Yeah, Dr. Ibsen has a prayer for people like you on the spot, okay?
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Uh, yeah, fill us in a little bit more. I'm based on starting off at age 19 with such a dramatic problem, making it to 70 does strike me as unusual. Can you fill us in a little more? What happened in the interim to you?
Well, a lot. I mean, there's academic things, and then eventually becoming an advocate for disability rights. Getting involved with like our mayor's committee, trying to get houses of worship to be accessible. My faith has always been important to me, because when I was 14, and I thank God this was all before I, fractured my spine, I had learned that I could become, after my parents would take us to the Franciscan monastery here in DC, it was a replica of what is in the Holy Land. And I really fell in love with St. Francis of Assisi. Actually, the symbol behind me is a symbol of the Franciscan secular order. And I found out then you could join at age 14. It was 3 years, 4 years of study, novitiate, all of that. And then I made my profession when I was 18. So it's helped me so much.
Mhm. Now, did you go on and then get some degrees and do some either?
Yes, I eventually got my bachelor's degree with honors, in biology. I just switched, and I was in the pre-med track too. I planned to be a physician from the time I was in fifth grade, but I knew it took me extra time, because once I had the fracture, I tried, but almost every time I would go to classes full time, I'd end up getting, kind of getting worse. And so the doctors eventually told me, don't go full time. So it took me longer to get my degree. But then I also realized that sitting on lab benches and all of that it was really difficult. I mean, very difficult. So I knew I couldn't stay in the field of science, but I found out by taking a graduate course in the philosophy of science when I was an undergrad that there was a field called the history of science. And I was like fascinated by it. I mean, studying people like Galileo or Darwin, I mean, just to kind of like the highlights. So I thought, well, I wanted to continue my education. And I thought, well, this at least would be a more sedentary thing. Maybe I could do it. I was still, trying to cope with doctor's visits in and out of the hospital with more surgeries, Harrington rod fusion, and from T8 through the sacrum, and then the rods, because of the softness of my spinal bones, broke loose, and then I had to go back, and it just one thing after another. I then was diagnosed with CRPS in the 80s when it was reflex sympathetic dystrophy. And that kind of overshadowed my diagnosis of the arachnoiditis, and it didn't get the attention because, again, I think they knew so little about it then. And so it kind of fell to the wayside, but it was always on my record, okay, as having adhesive. By the 90s, they were describing it because I had MRIs pretty much every 5 to 8 years, and they could monitor the progression, and it was adhesive by the time I was in my 1990s. And I did get my master's degree in the history of science. It took a while because, again, that was when I had the fusion and the rods removal, and it just, I loved school. I know I pushed a lot of times to go back because it was a course I really wanted to take and was only offered every 3 years or something. And I knew I couldn't make it with the New England weather and all of that for another 3 years. So sometimes I know I pushed myself too much, but eventually you kind of learn you got to live within certain limits. I mean, and I still push a little, but that's kind of me.
Sure.
So,
You still have your rods in now?
no, they had to be removed because they slipped out of place and began scraping my spine so long they found increased bone density around that area where the lower part of my sacrum. So yeah, it was painful. But the doctors in DC, when I came back on a break, they didn't want to touch it because they said, well, the doctor said Brigham did it, so you go back there. And so I had to wait until I could go back to school to be able to get that taken care of. And it was difficult. So
Yeah. Now, tell us something about yourself now. Now, do you live alone or are you in an assisted living situation? What is your living status?
okay. Ever since 1993, which was when I was no longer able to transfer, I couldn't bear weight anymore. I mean, it was a gradual thing with the walking over the 80s and all of that. And then actually, I'm living right now in a nursing home, and I've been in a skilled nursing facility since 1993 continuously. My first facility closed in 2016, and so I'm now living in another one here in DC, which started out being a whole lot better than it is now. We're very poorly staffed, and that's one of the problems. I think the people they're really trying, but it's upper management's decisions that anyway, I was ready to say something and I lost my train of thought, which is typical. But something about I had surgical sympathectomies, anterior and posterior approach for my upper extremities because, and I think, well, when I had CRPS, I could not use my left hand at all. For 13 years, I had no use and it was excruciating pain. And so they had tried nerve blocks, the kind of, there's stellate ganglion blocks and all kinds of stuff. I mean, I had those infusions, not ketamine, not at that point. lidocaine infused. I almost died from that one. It was just, they let it go on too long after I said I had a metallic taste in my mouth. Next thing I know, I'm passing out and I got an ambu bag over me. It's like, that's why I say I thank God to be alive because I've been close to death so many times. But the Lord always had somebody there to help me.
Uh-huh. Mark, I see you here. Go ahead. What questions do you have for her? I know you have a great concern about people like her who've been disabled for a long time, and what are we going to do to help people who really need the kind of help Donna has, and Donna's so positive about it, about her life.
Well, I'm positive too. I'm positive something landed on you when you were 19. And I'm also positive you have more resilience than anybody I've seen. And you have an attitude of gratitude. I'd like you to be more specific about what you're grateful for.
I use that phrase, an attitude of gratitude, when I'm talking to people who, maybe get a little down or discouraged, and those things happen. They come and go in life. And I said, Isaac, when I feel that way, I have to remember the blessings I have. I said, I still have 3 meals a day. I'm not hungry. I'm not on the streets. And, I'm not in the elements. I said, I have people who care about me. And I said, and on top of that, I have a God who's been protecting me. I mean, because just to still be here is a miracle. The fact that I was even born when I wasn't even supposed to survive past 3 months in my mom's womb, she didn't even tell me that until the year she was dying of cancer. And so, I mean, I now know that would have helped the doctors understand why my spine was so messed up to predispose me to all this. But, she didn't want to upset me, and I understand that. So, but yeah, I like that. I always use that phrase, an attitude of gratitude.
My next question is, and this is see how if I can phrase this. It seems to me, with your intellect and your positive attitude towards life, that you would have taken over that nursing home by now.
I don't know.
What's going on with that?
I don't know if our administrator would call me a friend. I don't think he would. But,
Yeah.
but I've been president of the resident council, and
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Advocate for more staff, and because people are afraid, they're angry, they're upset, and just I just say a prayer every time I go, because it's just trying. People begin to argue, and I say, please, let's lower the temperature, and yeah, it's yeah, I don't think they're looking forward to those meetings.
Well, I think this is similar to the inflamed glial cells. We need a little inflammation to keep things going.
Glial cells on 2 legs. Yes.
So you're a burr under their saddle, I can imagine. Yeah.
Oh,
Have you ever sought advocacy outside of this situation, like the ACLU filed ADA complaints, et cetera, et cetera? Where has that led you?
Actually, yes. Earlier on, while I was still in the community back in the 80s. In fact, there were several things that people were encouraging me to get involved with. There was something called this wheelchair program. It was not a beauty pageant. It was to highlight what people had accomplished despite disabilities and with disabilities. Yeah. So in 1981, I was titled Miss Wheelchair DC, and the others had named me Miss Congeniality. Okay. And then, so I represented DC in the national program, and I was first runner up. And apparently, my parents were told that when they realized I couldn't sit very long, they knew that the travel nationally would just be too much, but they still wanted to acknowledge, so I appreciate that. Once I found out that I'd have to travel probably 50,000 miles in a year, I thought, no, thank you, please, no, Lord. So he answered my prayer. didn't get that. But when I came back, you know, I was asked to serve on the mayor's committee for persons with disabilities on the education subcommittee. And we were able to begin implementing some of the, because, you know, the ADA had just been signed that year. So, you know, we began to implement these things for school children, the Education for All Children's Act and all of that. And then I was also beginning to realize that, you know, my own church had very few accessible buildings. And so we were fundraising and trying to get grants to get a ramp put in my church. Meanwhile, a friend I met through someone else was offering to help me get to another Catholic parish that didn't have any steps. And for a couple of years, God bless her, you know, Audrey, she's 94 now. I mean, and she would come and put my wheelchair in the back of the car and just we'd go to church and then somebody would help her. And I mean, people have been so good, you know, and so, I mean, that really, I mean, at firsthand, you know, experience with inaccessibility. So, and then one time I did have to file an ADA complaint with the Justice Department and was awarded, you know, and I just used that to help, you know. But anyway, that was a while back, you know. But I mean, whatever I can do here, even if it's by email, you know, advocacy. I'm involved with the Franciscan Virtual Justice Circles. They advocate for different things, and you do whatever you can. At the minimum, we pray. And but I sent emails for people who are in states where there's the death penalty, because personally, I believe Christ didn't come to redeem us if he didn't think we all had the capability of change, you know. Yeah. And sometimes after a person has served 20, 30 years, they're a different person than they were as a youth who did something foolish, you know, and something terrible sometimes. But anyway, that's one of my
Donna, we're going to come to an end here, but you're very enlightening.
I got one more question, Dr. Tennant.
Oh, you bet. Go ahead.
I got to have this question answered. Dr. Tennant and I have been asking this question repeatedly, and I bet you know, and you probably have a generous response to it, I can just tell. But what happened to the clergy regarding what happened to us in pain, and why aren't they out on the front lines with us as a civil rights issue? What's going on there?
I think a lot, especially in the Catholic Church, they're just not even aware. They come, I mean, they have a ministry that they've been taught from the time they're in seminary. Oh, minister to the sick. It's all very biblical, all very, not for every priest. Some are more involved, but yeah, I mean, they're mostly involved with their parishes and the people who can get to the building and get to these activities. They really aren't that aware of it. That awareness is a big problem for a lot of society, whether you're clergy or anybody else. If people don't know, how can they care? You know?
Got it.
Mark, I'm so glad you asked. And let me just say one other thing that Donna and everybody listening, that Mark and I have an attitude or a belief that is foreign to many, many people. And I'm going to just say it right here. It is our belief, and a lot of it is religious and spiritual, from our own inner beings. We believe that a person should be able to live as long as their life allows them. Despite them being disabled, everybody ought to be able to get whatever medications and health care they need to live out their natural life. That's not a popular belief. We have a lot of people who, even political people, will say, well, if you're 70s, as long as you need to live, we don't want to pay for anybody that's older. But I just want to make it very clear that we sustain a religious belief that everybody, if the good Lord is going to give them 65, 85, 105, that's the good Lord's call. But as far as we physicians go, our job is to try to keep you going as long as you want to keep going. Okay. And I continue to be very, like Mark, very disappointed in the clergy. You would have thought that they would be out leading the charge. And I for one, have been criticized over time by the clergy for prescribing narcotics to people for pain and keeping people alive. And I've personally sustained that as a physician who has a belief that they don't have. Okay, so I know Mark and I. That's another stake we're putting out here.
Well,
Thank
That's
you.
where we're
Donna's on
at.
our team
That's where
now.
we're at. Yeah.
Oh, I applaud
And
you. I thank
you
you
guys,
in
and keep
advance.
spreading
Thank
the
you
word. I
so
mean,
much.
yeah. One other thing too, in medical closing, scoliosis is a major risk factor for arachnoiditis. Everybody that has scoliosis needs to be aware of what adhesive arachnoiditis, and it's a major risk factor. Okay, with that, Donna, I want you to work with Jamie and anybody else who sees this. We don't, to coin an old term, we don't want anyone left behind. Okay, all right. Mark and
Donna, I don't want you to leave us behind. You have a spiritual connection that is rich. And thank you for sharing it with us.
Thank you for asking. God bless you. Thank you for what you do for everybody on this line and in your own life and your own sphere of influence. Thank you.
yeah, you're sure welcome. We'll talk again. Okay,
Thank
you keep working with us, Mark. In the time we have left, you sent me earlier a few days ago your experience in dealing with the federal opioid response team. It was a sad, laughable experience you had. Could you tell us what the federal government is doing? They claim that they're trying to help people who can't get their opioids. What did you find out when you investigated this?
I found a little website at the CDC, so it's not really federal. CDC is kind of like quasi-federal, you know. And they have an opioid rapid response team that is neither about opiates, it's not about rapid, it's not about response, and it's not about a team.
Yeah, well, what is it about? I mean,
Well, it's about covering their ass, essentially. And so, and Bev Scheckman
they're
sent me
not
some.
doing a very good job. I think
Oh
that
no,
they're
their ass is wide open. Yeah. So they have about 8 pages, and I encourage everybody on this call to inquire because I think they need to be poked. But essentially, they have an 8-page website that says Opioid Rapid Response Team, and on that, the first picture on the page is of an ambulance. Now, when you say Opioid Rapid Response Team and you have a picture of an ambulance, you got an idea that somebody's coming to help. And there's nobody coming. They basically, they try to do a reach out, and basically, I'm the CDC opioid response team. And there may be some other people that are more stealth than me that are responding that way, but I'm using that website as a defense, essentially, in some of my legal stuff, where the state of Maine and the state of Oregon and the state of Montana are essentially after me for treating people with pain by telemedicine. And my attorney says I should be stealth, but I cannot keep quiet about this. So sorry, John, if you hear me. This is a critical gap in all of the agencies that are determined to take people off of pain medicines, whether they mean well or not. And I have to suspect that they don't, because if they meant well, they'd have fixed it by now. And so they don't mean well. But essentially, you can't take people off of opiates with no other alternative. And you can't promise them, oh, we promise you'll feel better, because most people do, like the New England task force people do. They just basically force taper people. My patient, well, what I'd like to say about my passion is that I would like to, in the few minutes we have left, I'd play a video of a conversation I had with a pharmacist. My patient in Maine, Brandy Stokes, I've been treating her for about a year, very high doses of opiates. She might be on this call. I haven't really talked about her. The people from Walgreens have helped her out for about a year since she was forced to be dropped from her pharmacy. When I sent a prescription in from the pharmacy that's been treating her for 8 years, her nurse practitioner canceled the prescription, and the pharmacists at that pharmacy have been reluctant to fill my prescriptions and refused. So I called the Walgreens pharmacy, and I'm going to play what happened. This is a conversation between me and the pharmacist at Walgreens after they told Brandy they're not going to treat her anymore. Oh, hi, Ken. This is Dr. Mark Ibsen calling. I'm calling about Brandy Stokes. Let me see if I can.
Doctor, I don't have anything to discuss with you. I hope you have a good day.
He hung up. And I'm laughing because I just want to tear somebody's face off about this. But I called that pharmacist to see what was up with him not filling any more prescriptions that I filled for that I sent for Brandy, and the pharmacist would not speak to me. Now that is the ultimate in unprofessional activity as far as I'm concerned. I'm going to get to the bottom of this, and ultimately, Brandy and I are working towards developing some type of injunction to get her treated, because Brandy was dying when she met me, and she's been thriving since I was able to restore her medications, and now that plan has been thwarted, and I'm mad as hell about it. But I don't know. I don't know what preposition to put in here, but essentially this has to be pushed back against, and I don't have the money to do it. And hopefully Brandy and her family can pay some of the legal fees, and we've got a GoFundMe going. So and I'm $27,000 down in the since May, defending my own cases, and essentially I'm not complaining. This is an opportunity for us to make a difference, and Brandy's case may be the one that ought to go national, and that ought to be told on CNN and MSNBC and maybe Fox. So that's my report from the field. It was kind of wide ranging and quick, but that's all I got for now.
Yeah, Donna just flashed on the screen that she has, her prayers are with you and Brandy, and I echo that. Our prayers are with you, and hope you the very best. And we need a universal prayer for all the people out there suffering. Anyway, well, it's there. Again, we're coming to the end of things here tonight. Let us keep us up to date on this, Mark. Appreciate you pushing this, because it's just not right. It's just not right. I mean, it's hard to grasp. You can't have this drug, and they have no alternatives. And then worse, the federal government's saying we have a rapid response team, but they don't do anything. This whole thing is what do you say? It's just.
Well, I would disagree with you. I think they do have a response. They do have an alternative. I'm about to show it to you. Here it is.
Cross fingers.
Yeah, that's it. That's
Only
all
you
they
can
got.
come up with that. Yeah. Well, does Blue Cross pay for it? That's all I want to. All right. Thanks again, Jamie. We're going to turn this back to you. It's been a great session, Mark. Thanks so much. Keep us informed. Donna, keep up your spiritual spreading. We're going to call that spiritual spreading in your case. Okay.
We're preaching it, baby. We're preaching it.
Yes.
You got it. Thanks again. Good night, everybody. See you in a week.
Good night,
Thank you.
Dr. Tennant. Thanks so
I'll
much.
stay on.
God bless.
Thanks so much. God bless. And for those that would want to just hang in with us for just a moment of prayer before we close out, if anybody wants to lead us in prayer, feel free to say.
I would say
so.
Donna. I nominate Donna for that.
Me too. That's how I feel. Donna, do you mind? I mean,
I don't mind. I just don't want to be the only one in case someone
No, I'll join you.
that's okay. We'll all join in with you. That's all right.
All right. Okay.
You're not by yourself, Donna. We're all
never alone. We're holding hands with you.
Thank you. Dear Lord, you hear the cries of your children who are needing you, who are in pain and suffering. And you hear the response we're getting of indifference and neglect by the administrations, by the government, by bureaucrats who don't know and don't understand. Please enlighten their minds, open their hearts to know that for the grace of God, it could be them or someone they love. And that they need, if they call themselves, whether they're Buddhist, Christian, Jewish, Hindu, it doesn't matter. We all are here to work to salvation in a better life with you. But meanwhile, we are to love and help each other. Every religious faith has that as a basic that we're to care for each other. So I ask you, Lord, to please move the hearts of that pharmacist and those like him anywhere, everywhere. People who are indifferent, only you can reach someone's heart. So please open their hearts and minds to understand that you want us to love each other and care for each other so that we can be together to worship you forever in the next life that will be so much better than this one. Thank you, Lord.
Thank you, Donna.
Amen.
I have an addendum to your prayer.
Thank you.
Dear Lord, if you can't open their hearts, then twist their ankles and we can know them by their limping.
Oh, my goodness. I love your sense of humor.
Bye, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
I love you.
Thank you for that
love
beautiful
you all.
prayer, Donna. That
God
was
bless you.
wonderful. Thank you.
That was wonderful.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good night.
We will see the victory, no matter what this looks like.
Amen. That's right.
See you next week. You're not alone.
Bye, Jamie.
Good night.
Good night. Night, y'all.
Good night.